For most of human history, knowing meant naming. To understand something was to give it a label, define its limits, and place it within a mental structure that felt stable. A thing existed because it could be described. Reality felt reliable because language seemed to match it. The world appeared orderly not because it was fully understood, but because it could be talked about with confidence. Physics inherited this habit. Classical science was built on the assumption that the universe could be mapped with precision. If every object had a position, every event a cause, and every system a predictable outcome, then knowledge could grow endlessly by accumulation. The unknown was simply the not yet. Reality itself was never in doubt, only our access to it. Quantum physics did not challenge this gently. It did not arrive as a philosophical critique or a slow revision. It arrived as a failure. Experiments stopped agreeing with explanation. Measurements contradicted intuition. Equations worked, but the stories built around them collapsed. The universe continued to function, but understanding began to fracture. What emerged was not a new picture of reality, but the breakdown of pictures altogether. At fundamental scales, description stopped behaving like representation. Particles could not be said to be anywhere in the usual sense. Properties could not be said to exist before measurement. Events could not be said to follow a simple sequence of cause and effect. Knowledge no longer sat outside reality observing it. It was entangled with the act of interaction itself. This was not a discovery about matter alone. It was a discovery about the limits of knowing. Physics encountered a boundary where asking certain questions no longer produced meaningful answers. Not because the questions were forbidden, but because they assumed a structure that reality itself did not provide. At the same time, inner observation reveals a parallel limit. When attention turns inward, experience can be described endlessly. Thoughts, sensations, emotions, memories. Yet the moment one tries to describe awareness itself, language fails. Awareness cannot be located, measured, or objectified. It cannot be stepped outside of. Any attempt to define it turns it into something it is not. This is not a poetic limitation. It is a structural one. Awareness is not hidden. It is too close. It is the condition that allows experience to appear, not another object within experience. Trying to grasp it conceptually is like trying to see vision using sight. Here, science and introspection meet not in answers, but in silence. Both encounter domains where certainty dissolves. Both reveal that knowledge has edges, and beyond those edges, reality does not disappear. Only our descriptions do. The mind resists this realization. It is trained to resolve uncertainty, not to rest within it. When explanation fails, discomfort arises. We rush to replace broken models with new ones, even if they are weaker. We prefer flawed certainty over honest not knowing. Yet the deepest insights rarely come from replacement. They come from suspension. Quantum theory did not replace classical certainty with a new certainty. It replaced it with probability, with limits, with relationships instead of objects, with interaction instead of independence. It revealed that what we call reality is not a collection of things, but a network of events whose meaning depends on context. Inner observation reveals the same pattern. The self is not a fixed entity, but a relational process. Identity depends on memory, sensation, and thought, interacting moment by moment. When these interactions change, identity shifts. What remains is not a thing, but a field of awareness within which identity appears. This does not lead to nihilism. it leads to precision. When certainty falls away, attention sharpens. Experience becomes less filtered by assumption. The world is no longer approached as something to be mastered, but as something to be met. Knowing gives way to seeing. Time itself loses its authority here. Past and future reveal themselves as constructions arising in the present. Memory is not the past, it is an event happening now. Anticipation is not the future, it is imagination happening now. Experience never leaves the present, even when thought insists otherwise. Physics echoes this disruption. At fundamental levels, time behaves strangely. Order becomes relative. Sequence loses absoluteness. What felt like a universal backdrop becomes an emergent property. Time, like identity, appears stable only at certain scales. What survives all of this collapse is not chaos, but stillness. Not the stillness of inactivity, but the stillness of what does not need to move to be present. When explanation fails, awareness remains. When models break, perception continues. When certainty dissolves, experience does not vanish. This stillness is not mystical. It is not elevated. It is ordinary and overlooked. It is present in every moment, unnoticed because it does not announce itself. It does not seek understanding. It does not require belief. It does not belong to any identity or worldview. The most radical implication of quantum physics is not that reality is strange, but that our demand for certainty is misplaced. The most radical implication of inner observation is not that the self is illusory, but that awareness does not need definition to be complete. Both point to the same quiet conclusion. Reality is not obligated to make sense in the way we expect. Understanding is a tool, not a mirror. When its limits are reached, something more fundamental becomes visible, not as an answer, but as presence. There is no final explanation waiting to be discovered. There's only deeper attention. The universe does not resolve into clarity. It opens into depth, and depth does not require conclusions. It requires stillness. What remains when no one stops is not emptiness. It is intimacy, experience without distance, reality without interpretation, awareness without object. It has always been here, before certainty, before explanation, before the need to understand. Still, within